We shall go on to the end. We shall tell these tales on land and even on YouTube. To each then his task, and to all the same duty: stay faithful, stand firm, and carry on.
1930s were a nervous time in Britain. Across the channel, a certain Austrian chap with a silly moustache was making quite a nuisance of himself. Hitler, they called him. Bit of a worry, what? The British, ever so slightly panicked, started dusting off their gas masks. Remember those? Ghastly rubber things that made everyone look like a cross between an elephant and a particularly glum fish. They even made tiny ones for babies. Bless. Then came 1939, and with it, war. Finally. Except not really. You see, after the initial declaration, things went rather quiet. So quiet, in fact, that this period became known as the Phony War. There was even a rather embarrassing incident where the BBC accidentally announced a German invasion, causing widespread panic. Turned out to be a flock of seagulls. Awkward. Still, the threat was real, and the Brits, ever practical, got on with it. Rationing began, with limits on butter, sugar, and bacon. The thought: air raid shelters popped up like mushrooms, and children were evacuated from cities to the countryside, much to the chagrin of rural homeowners and chickens everywhere. The quiet didn't last, of course. In 1940, the Germans, perhaps a tad impatient, decided to liven things up a bit. Thus began the Blitz, a period of intense bombing raids on London and other British cities. Imagine, if you will, a miserable winter night. It's freezing, you're huddled in the dark, blackouts you see to confuse those pesky German bombers, and the only thing on the wireless is Vera Lynn singing about bluebirds. Then, the sirens wail. You scramble for the shelter, tripping over the cat and a stray gas mask. The ground shakes, the air smells of cordite, and somewhere in the distance a building collapses. Fun times. Despite the chaos, life, as they say, went on. People went to work, fell in love, and even complained about the lack of variety in their rationed meals. Spam fritters again, Ethel, became a common refrain. Dunkirk, a rather dramatic evacuation of British troops from France, happened. Churchill delivered his stirring speeches, full of bulldog spirit and promises of victory. And through it all, the RAF fought back valiantly in the Battle of Britain, their Spitfires and Hurricanes dancing in the sky. Life during the Blitz was, to put it mildly, inconvenient. Imagine having to queue for hours for a measly ounce of tea, or being forced to wear darn socks because, well, clothes rationing. People became masters of improvisation. Old newspapers became wallpaper. Curtains were fashioned from blackout material, and a black market for everything from nylons to chocolate flourished. The government, bless their cotton socks, did their best to keep spirits up. Dig for victory became the slogan, encouraging everyone to grow their own vegetables. Even Buckingham Palace had a veggie patch. The Queen Mum, a dab hand with a trowel, apparently grew prize-winning marrows. Of course, there were rules, and rather a lot of them. No hoarding, no wasting food, and heaven forbid you got caught decorating your dinner plates with food coloring to make it look like you had more than you did. Yes, really, people were that desperate for a splash of color in their lives. While the men were away fighting, or let's be honest, queuing for spam, the women of Britain kept the country running. They worked in factories, drove buses, operated anti-aircraft guns, and generally kept the home fires burning. They were the original Rosie the Riveters, and they did it all with a stiff upper lip and a jaunty scarf tied around their heads. The war effort, as you might imagine, required everyone to do their bit. Children collected scrap metal, housewives knitted socks for soldiers, and even the family dog probably felt obliged to chase away the odd German paratrooper, or at least bark at the radio during Hitler's speeches. And let's not forget the animals. Horses pulled ploughs and carts, pigeons carried messages, and cats. Well, cats mostly just complained about the lack of sardines, but they did catch the odd rat, which was something. Every little bit helped, even if that little bit involved chasing a ball of yarn while a bombing raid raged overhead. We can take it. The spirit of that. 41. By 1941, the Blitz was in full swing. London was a mess. Coventry had been flattened, and the nights were filled with the drone of bombers and the wail of sirens. But the British spirit, much like a particularly resilient cup of tea, simply refused to be broken. There was a sense of camaraderie, of shared purpose, that transcended class and circumstance. People helped each other, shared what little they had, and faced the unknown with a mix of courage and black humor. After all, when you've just spent the night huddled in a damp basement while bombs rain down overhead, a spot of sardonic wit is practically a survival mechanism. The Blitz spirit, they called it. and it became a defining characteristic of the British wartime experience. It was a spirit of resilience, of defiance, and of a deep-seated belief that, no matter how bad things got, a good cuppa and a biscuit could solve almost anything, turning the tide from Stalingrad to D-Day. The year is 1943. The tide, dear reader, is turning. The Germans, having bitten off a bit more than they could chew in Russia, Stalingrad anyone, are starting to feel the pinch. Meanwhile, the Yanks, finally realizing that this whole war thing is rather important, have joined the party. In 1944, the Allies, in a feat of military planning so complex it would make your head spin, launched the D-Day landings. Thousands of ships, tanks and men stormed the beaches of Normandy, liberating France and pushing the Germans back towards Berlin. Back in Blighty, the mood was cautiously optimistic. The end, while still a distant glimmer, was at least in sight. Rationing continued, of course, because what's a war without a good cue? But there was a sense that the worst was over. The blackout, however, remained, much to the chagrin of anyone who enjoyed seeing where they were going at night. Doodlebugs and rockets, new terrors from above. Just when you thought it was safe to go back outside, the Germans, never ones to miss an opportunity to ruin everyone's day, unleashed their new toys. V-1 flying bombs, nicknamed Doodlebugs due to their distinctive buzzing sound, and V-2 rockets. These unpleasant surprises rained down on London and the southeast, causing widespread panic and a sudden surge in demand for hard hats. Imagine, if you will, walking down the street, minding your own business, when suddenly you hear a buzzing sound. You look up and there, silhouetted against the clouds, is a V-1, looking for all the world like a giant angry wasp. What do? Duck, obviously. The V-2s, on the other hand, were silent but deadly. You wouldn't hear them coming until it was too late. They were, in a word, terrifying. Still, the Brits, ever resourceful, developed early warning systems and anti-aircraft defences. They even used barrage balloons to try and deter the Doodlebugs, with mixed results. VE Day, it's all over, almost. And then it happened. May 8th, 1945, VE Day, victory in Europe. The war, at long last, was over. Churchill announced the good news, and the nation erupted in joyous celebration. Street parties were held, bunting was strung up, and people danced in the streets. Even the Queen, so rumour has it, was spotted doing a conga line with a guardsman. The blackout, finally and mercifully, came to an end. For the first time in years, the night sky blazed with light. It was a sight to behold, a symbol of hope and freedom. But the war wasn't entirely over. In the Pacific, the fight against Japan raged on. Then came Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the world learned a terrifying new word: atomic bomb. On August 15th, 1945, Japan surrendered, bringing World War II to an end. Back to normal. Post-war Britain. With the war over, Britain faced the daunting task of rebuilding. Cities lay in ruins, the economy was in tatters, and the country was exhausted. But amidst the rubble and the loss, there was a sense of hope, a belief that a better world could be built from the ashes. Rationing continued for several years after the war. Some things, it seems, are slower to change than others. But slowly, life began to return to something resembling normality. The men came home, the factories switched back to producing prams instead of tanks, and the country breathed a collective sigh of relief. The war had changed Britain forever. It had tested the nation's resolve, its spirit, and its capacity for tea consumption. But it had also shown the world the true meaning of courage, resilience, and the importance of a good sense of humour in the face of adversity. And that, dear reader, is something worth remembering.